Yeah, so you're talking about that tipping point, and it's really scary because it's not just as you explained, the Earth getting warmer. There's a lot more involved in this whole crisis that we have in climate change. But we're really seeing over the past few years, these severe weather conditions are increasing in the United States. Recently, we saw in Texas, first of all, it was crazy. They had this crazy snowstorm, which usually does not happen in Texas. It's in the southern part of the United States. And normally they have pretty mild winters, but they had this crazy snowstorm, and they lost power for days, and many people actually died because the infrastructure in Texas just couldn't handle this. And while working people and poor people were without heat and without electricity, you could see pictures of downtown, downtown in the big cities where these tall high-rise buildings have, lights on every single floor, 30, 40 stories up. And it shows the ridiculousness of how when we're in a crisis, how resources are allocated. A few years back, we saw in the Caribbean, in Puerto Rico, we had Hurricane Maria, which was absolutely devastating for the island. And some people were without power for years. And it's just, we're seeing crisis on top of crisis. And we know that we live on a planet that has these, weather storms and things that happen. It's natural. But can you talk a little bit about why capitalism, our economic system itself, is incapable of handling these crises?
Yeah, so in general, natural disasters are inevitable on some level. They have always been earthquakes, hurricanes, and forest fires. But leaving it at that would paint a distorted picture. The escalating climate crisis has increased in frequency and intensity the natural disasters, and it continues to do so. So we have, for example, melting glaciers that destabilize mountains and increase the likelihood of mudslides. Rising temperatures and droughts increase the risk of forest fires. Warmer oceans mean more and stronger tropical storms like hurricanes and typhoons. And as the climate crisis is fundamentally driven by the capitalist system, the increasing intensity and frequency of these natural disasters is as well. It's interlinked. Another example that was mentioned already by Jara before is the pandemic. The profit-driven deforestation and destruction of natural habitats increases the likelihoods of such pandemics also in the future. So we have a capitalist system that is fundamentally causing the increase of frequency and intensity of these natural disasters. That's the one side. And the other side, that it's also, as you said, incapable of dealing with the aftermath and how to prevent it, how to mitigate the effects. The neo-colonial countries, for example, they're disproportionately affected. Not only do hurricanes and typhoons typically happen around the equator and not around capitalist core countries, but then also when they do, they are horribly neglected, as you said, for example, with Hurricane Maria. And the reason for this is that, first of all, like building infrastructure to prevent the horrible effects or to mitigate them is cost intense, but not profitable. Rebuilding things afterwards is also not the most profitable thing. And these neo-colonial countries often don't have the financial means to do so by themselves. They're also in a big public debt and need to prioritize other parts of their economy and society. The short answer is private money will not go into this direction because it is not profitable. We can make the point, I think, quite well with privatized infrastructure, which tends to take higher risks. So there's a higher risk in malfunctioning in privatized infrastructure, such as energy corporations. Essentially, this sacrifices people's security for profits. We have the example in London with the Grenfell Tower a couple of years ago with a horrible fire there. We have California's PG&E energy company. We probably all remember the horrible forest fires of 2018, which killed 84 people. Those were caused by faulty equipment of the energy company. And this is not the only case. This investor-owned company has a long track record of sacrificing people's safety for private profit. However, there is also a counter-movement by the working class. There is an initiative, particularly for PG&E, There's an initiative for democratic public ownership. It's called Let's Own PG&E. And they advocate for worker and community control under democratic public ownership. They argue that PG&E should function democratically for safe, clean, and affordable energy and good union jobs. And the same goes for the example of Texas that you mentioned before. At the core, in the capitalist system, the goal of production is not to satisfy people's needs, but private profit. And as an answer to that, we need to take, which we will go more in detail later on, I guess, we need to take key sectors such as infrastructure, energy, mobility and transport, health and education into democratic public ownership. Because once this profit-driven imperative, the profit imperative is removed, we can actually focus on producing for people's needs and to mitigate climate crisis.